Doug, what branch of the service and which war did you serve in?
I was in the Air Force, and it was during the Vietnam War.
What was the highest rank you achieved?
Staff Sergeant, which is E5.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted. I was going to be drafted, so I decided to enlist instead.
Do you remember the date?
Well, I went in, I guess it was June 10th or June 11th of 1971.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in Connecticut with my parents. I was just finishing up college that year.
Why did you choose the Air Force?
Well, I know the Air Force because my father was in the Air Force. I'm a military brat. So.
Your father made his career in the Air Force?
Yes, he did, yeah.
After you enlisted, where did you go for your induction?
The induction was in New Haven, Connecticut.
And where did you go for your basic training?
Well, everybody who goes in the Air Force is at Lackland Air Force Base
And
in
where
Texas, just outside of San Antonio.
Did you go to Lackland for basic right after enlisting? Or
Yes.
Did you have any time in
No,
between?
went right in.
How long was it basic training?
Basic was 6 weeks long.
And what was that like?
Since it was June, it was hot. Not physically rigorous, I wouldn't say, but more, a lot of processing had to be done, paperwork and stuff like that.
Now, what kinds of things did they teach you in basic?
Military protocol, how to march, how to salute, basically the how to get around in the Air Force type of thing. So.
Did you know any of that already, being in the military?
Yeah, I was pretty much in tune with a lot of that already.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
Let me think. We only had one instructor. His name is Sergeant Cosgrove.
And what was he like?
Nice guy. They were drill instructors. Not real friendly, but reasonable people. So didn't really have. I was a squad leader when I was down there too.
And what does being a squad leader entail?
Mostly making sure that the guys in your squad were sort of shipshape. They had their suits pressed and their personal, hygiene was okay, and were ready for inspections and things like that.
How big is a squad?
Well, we were I guess it was about 10 guys in the squad. And there were 4 squads, and it was, the unit was a flight. So we were a group of about 40 guys in a barracks.
Where did you go after basic training?
Well, from there I went to Biggs Field, which is part of Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas.
What was the name of the field?
Biggs.
B-I-G-S?
B-I-G-G-S. Biggs Airfield.
And what did you do there?
I attended a branch of the Defense Language Institute, where we studied the Hanoi dialect of Vietnamese.
Did you choose that, or did the Air Force put you there?
Well, everyone when you went in, one of the things we had to do was take a test in basic training on language proficiency, And so those that, I guess, achieved a certain level score were, kind of selected and sent off to the training from there.
Did you have any special background in languages?
Well, I'd taken 4 years of French in high school. I'd taken a year of German in college. And my mother's German. So although I didn't speak a lot of German, and we lived overseas a lot of the time too. So.
How long did you attend the Defense Language Institute?
We were there for 9 months in El Paso.
And was it classroom training in Vietnamese every day?
Yeah, we had it was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day in the class, and then generally you had 2 hours to 3 hours in the evening of studying your lessons. You were talking with your class members, and they broke us down into we stayed together as a class. There was about 20 of us in the class, and there were also some Army guys included. So we did a lot of, and the teachers, by the way, were all South Vietnamese teachers, so they were civilians.
Now this was still in 1971?
This was in 71 and 72.
Did you become fluent in Vietnamese by the end of the 9 months?
Fairly fluent. We had to be able to write, speak, and read the language, and of course understand it for our jobs.
Did you know specifically what you were being trained for when you would be shipped overseas?
Yeah, because once we were we weren't officially into the segment or the group within the Air Force was the Security Service, which is air intelligence, and everything that we were studying was classified. All of our texts were classified, all of our dictionaries, everything we did was classified. And so that 9 months was strictly language training. From there we went on to crypto school in San Angelo, Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base, which is the Air Force intelligence base, so to speak, or it was at that time. And we were there taught operations and increased proficiency in the language and what we had to do with the language.
How long did you stay at Goodfellow?
Goodfellow, we were there another 5 months.
Was it the same group of people that were...
We went through as a class, everybody. I mean, some were weeded out for various reasons. And once we'd gotten through that training, we then went on to various survival schools. That was the third step for going overseas.
Where did you go to survival school?
I forget the name of the base. There was one right out of school that was down in a base south of San Angelo or Goodfellow, and that was flight school or flight training school. These were all relatively short schools, 1 week, 2 week courses. From there we went to...
What did you learn at flight training school?
Just how to take care of yourself in the aircraft, how to, what to expect, as far as, say you lost your oxygen for some reason, the aircraft had to go into a dive, how the feelings that you were going to get. You went into a high altitude simulator and they cut off your oxygen and you went through, oxygen deprivation for a while, things like that. Nothing terrible, just to kind of get a little experience of what was going to happen. And from there we went to water survival training. That was down in, what's the name of the base? Homestead Air Force Base near Miami on Biscayne Bay, where you learned how to, if you had to bail out of the aircraft, how you were going to bail out, parachute training, once you got in the water, water survival training, how to take care of yourself and how to take care of others.
Had you had any prior experience before enlisting in aircraft?
I'd flown in a lot of aircraft, not as a passenger, from prop jobs to jets. So I mean, I had a lot of experience that way, just getting around the world with my family.
After your training at Homestead, where did you go?
From there, actually, I went home for about, where was it? Maybe a week, and then I went on to Fairchild Air Force Base in outside Spokane, Washington, for 2 weeks of land survival training. There we were taught everything we would need as far as taking care of ourselves, escape and evasion techniques, where you actually went out into the sort of the wilderness and played good guys, bad guys, and they were after you. How techniques for resisting interrogation. If you got captured, you spent some time in their sort of Hotel Hanoi POW camp to learn what you could expect and how you were going to be able to resist it, type of thing, and how to improvise. Once you got down, if you were shot down, or how you were going to survive and then try and get someone in to rescue you. So we were, that was 2 weeks of training. It was fairly intense. From there, after that, I went home for a month, and then went overseas to Okinawa for a year and a half.
When you were training your last survival course at Fairchild.
Well, there was one more actually. Once we got over to Okinawa, we had to spend. We went down to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base, for jungle survival training. So that was another course that, again, went through the same sort of thing with escape and evasion, what to do if you got, shot down, or your plane went down for some reason and you were in the jungle, presumably Vietnam, and we played escape and evasion with the local Philippine tribesmen, actually, mountain tribesmen. So, which wasn't bad. It was kind of fun, actually. And we were there for about a week, and then back to Okinawa.
At that point, when you hadn't been to Vietnam yet, what was your expectation of exactly what you would be doing when you got to Vietnam?
We never went into Vietnam. Our group was not supposed to go into Vietnam.
And you knew that right from the beginning?
Yeah. There were a few people that had gone in when the war was hot, who were flying various aircraft out of Da Nang for, again, doing the same jobs that we were doing on other aircraft. And there was kind of it was called a TDY, so you were there temporarily doing the same duty. So you were stationed in Okinawa, but you would go down to Da Nang to do a temporary duty down there. And so they would rotate guys in and out of there all the time. But when I got there, the bombings had stopped, as far as we were concerned. The war was still on. And so we weren't required to go over there. And they really didn't want us there that much because We were not supposed to go in country for the most part.
Did your whole class go to Okinawa together?
We all went to Okinawa, yeah.
And you stayed there at the Air Force Base?
We stayed at Kadena. We were stationed at Kadena Air Force Base. That was where our barracks were. But we worked at a Army intelligence station called Tori Station.
Tori, T-O-R?
T-O-R-I, I believe it was, Tori Station. And we called it the antenna farm. It was
What was it?
The antenna farm. Because I mean, if you look at it from, it was just all antennas everywhere. So it was a intelligence operation.
Can you describe what that was like how many guys were there, how big was the facility?
The facility was, it was not a bad size. I'd say there had to have been working there at any time was about 200 guys, Army and Air Force, and some civilians also. We were kind of assigned there. The group I was with was the 69 90th Security Group. And that was our ground operation. We were divided up into, we were segmented, once we got there as a class, then they broke us up and assigned us to different, what we call flights. A flight being, again, about 20 guys. And there were 4 flights. And we worked around the clock, 24/7. Our flight would say, I think I was Charlie flight, but we would pull up 4 days working a regular day shift. We get a day and a half off, and then we switch to I think it was 5 to 11 shift at night. We get another day and a half off, and then we go to a 11 to 7, I think it was, shift. Then we would get 3 days off, and then we start all over. During that time, we would also have to fly missions out of Kadena. And the aircraft that we would fly were on RC-135M, as in Mary, models. And our flight would fly the mission.
What would you fly missions doing?
We were, I actually did some research online last night to see if any of this was still classified, but I couldn't find anything that said no, it wasn't. So I'm assuming, even though they still fly the same aircraft today, although they're changed the models, and I'm assuming they must have upgraded the interiors quite a bit, but they're still flying the same aircraft, basically. We thought long ago that they would have changed, gone up to something different, but they still have the same aircraft. So, but the purpose was to listen for all North Vietnamese communications traffic, to record the traffic, to translate it, and to provide real-time communications and intelligence to the field, whoever needed it in the theater. Whether that was well, at that time for us, it was primarily the South Vietnamese Army. But also when the war was hot, for our pilots to warn them of impending danger, to provide them with information on targets, to give information on troop movements coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail or otherwise, and also within the theater of operations itself, any movement of troops going from one place to another, and also to monitor and all North Vietnamese fighter and transport aircraft, where they were, what they were doing, in times when we were there, as far as when we were flying tactical missions, to let our guys know where they were, what they were doing, and what to expect. We weren't told of a lot of things because being intelligence, it was, you divided it up into segments, so one part didn't really know what the other part was doing too much. But from reading about it later on, we found out, like, we were part of something called T-Ball, which was, I'm not sure exactly how that's spelled, but it was to coordinate military intelligence to coming from various sources, from our aircraft, from the aircraft that were down in Vietnam, from forward air controllers, from guys on the Navy had their own ships down there off the coast.
Would you be in communication with all those different?
I wouldn't myself, because I was an operator, but we did have every mission had a commander, and that person would be the one who would pass the information off to whoever had to get it. The other client of ours was National Security Agency. So if there was something that was extremely important to get back to Washington, we had crypto equipment on board the aircraft to transmit that information directly back to Washington.
Right from the aircraft?
Well, it would go, it went to Fort Meade, Maryland, which is where NSA was, and they could transmit directly, yeah. So, and to everybody, all the senior people who were in the area, the SINCPAC and commanders down in South Vietnam and other places also. So when it was a hot war, it was a lot busier. When I got over there, things had settled down. It was kind of quiet. We still took a lot of traffic. It was both live voice. A lot of it was, I was assigned to monitor field radio communications. That was guys that were, actually down on the trail or something along those lines, or, in a battle situation, okay. Another group of our guys, all they did was monitor what we called multi-channel communications, which was what the North Vietnamese had done was to take their voice signal and split it up into different channels, frequency ranges, and then send it out so it came out garbled. Well, I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but our guys had captured one of these devices from one of the tunnels over there in South Vietnam, and had put something together that was basically the same, that could, we called, the signal when it went in was modulated so that it was garbled, and when we took it, picked it up on our machines, we demodulated it and brought it back to regular language or spoken word so that they could understand it. That was a lot more political type information. So generally it would be from higher level people. And the third group in our area was, of course, the guys, all they did was monitor aircraft communications between North Vietnamese aircraft and ground control intercept operators. So that it was any traffic, because the North Vietnamese, the way the ground control operators would tightly control their aircraft, where they went and what they could do. They weren't given free range like a lot of our guys were. So we had pretty good intelligence on all of their people. We knew who their pilots were. We knew, pretty much who the personalities were. So we had a lot of intelligence. I'll tell you, a lot of information.
And you were there just monitoring the field operations. Can you give me some examples of what kinds of things you heard?
When we were in the air, we had there was about 20 guys in the operators in the air. And we also had, our front end crew was a SAC crew, Strategic Air Command crew. We almost never saw those guys, and they never came back in our area. Our area was cut off from their area pretty much. We carried 2 or 3 technical guys to fix radios and tape recorders, and we also carried an electronic warfare officer with us. He was also a SAC guy. He monitored missile radar communications and signals, and recorded that information. So we could track where they moved their missiles, their ground-to-air missiles, and when they were launching, that kind of stuff. During a hot war, of course, that was important because we provide that information right directly to the guys in the field who needed it right away. The guys like myself who were listening, we had, each one of us had like 4 radios. We monitored 4 signals at a time. We searched for voice traffic. If we had 3, when we found a signal or somebody talking on the phone or whatever, we would immediately start recording that on one of our. We had, I think it was we had 1 tape deck. It was a reel-to-reel, okay, the old style, 7.5-inch reels. And then we had 1 very large tape deck that could record up to 21 different signals. And so a lot of our stuff, that if we didn't take it on our own tape recorder, it went over to the large tape. That tape ran continuously for the entire mission. Our missions were 18 hours long. It took us 3 hours to go fly from Okinawa down to our orbit, which was in the Gulf of Tonkin. And we spent 12 hours on station. We would take off, we would get to the operations center at Kadena at midnight. We would be briefed, and then we'd have to get out to the airplane. We also had to pick up our gear. We all had to carry, of course, parachute and helmets and oxygen mask. Okay, and so we'd take us out. They'd take us on a bus out to the aircraft, get on board the aircraft, check all the equipment out, make sure everything was working okay, including the safety equipment and the oxygen and everything. We wouldn't get off the ground until 3 o'clock in the morning. So we always took off in the dark. We always landed in the dark. And the aircraft were in revetments, which were steel concrete areas kind of off to the side, small area of the base where not too many people went, because they didn't really want to have people go nosing around and taking pictures and stuff like that. We had 6 aircraft. So we had 2 of them airborne, 1 airborne constantly, 24/7. And 1 or 2 were, of course, being worked on. So we get off the ground at around 3 o'clock in the morning, get all our systems working properly. If there was a spare bunk available, we'd sack out for a couple hours before we got down there. And we also had, about 6 or 7 extra guys with us to act as our relief. When I first started out, I was a relief guy. I was learning, the operation, and then later on, I became the primary. And then somebody was relieving me. Once you got down there, then it was continuous operation. The aircraft was like split. On one side was all the equipment. On the other side was where the bunks and the extra seats were for the spare guys and the guys that serviced the equipment. They had another area up towards the front of the aircraft behind the cockpit. And the rear of the aircraft was for, our latrine, and we had a small galley in the back kind of thing. So we could go back there and have a cup of coffee or just hang out for a little bit, okay? If we got somebody, if we had somebody take over for us, we could go and bunk out for a little while on the other side. Didn't sleep very well because the aircraft inside was very cold. I mean, they kept it cold to keep the equipment operating. And so when we flew, even though it might be 90 degrees on Okinawa, we brought heavy parkas with us and everything. The aircraft normally flew at around 41,000 feet. And we were supposed to stay within about 40 miles of the coast of North Vietnam. Their aircraft fighters, before I got there, had come out and tried to knock us out of the air, but we changed the orbits, and we also added fighter cover underneath us if we needed out from the fleet below. So after a while, that kind of stuff stopped. So we didn't have to worry too much about enemy aircraft. So basically, we were just recording live conversations. A lot of it was coded traffic, meaning it was 4 or 5 digit codes, or a mix of digits and alphanumeric characters, okay? We had with us in binders, a lot of it we were able to break out right there because we'd been flying for so long, or our other guys from other units had collected so much information that we kind of had like sheets with grids on them. And down one side would be numbers, 2-digit numbers, and on the top was another 2-digit number or 3-digit number. And then in the squares where they intersected where the what the code broke out to. And so you would, if you were rolling on a particular frequency, you could kind of tell, well, this was this particular operator, this is what the kind of code he was going to be sending, and you would be able to pretty much piece together what he was telling the other side, the other end. So we rolled, in my group, we rolled on a lot of traffic like that. It was a lot of 4-figure, 5-figure code. And other groups were, you know, like I said, the multi-channel guys, they did a lot of live voice communications, higher level stuff. And of course the ground controlled guys, they had to learn the lingo of the, how the back and forth. It wasn't a lot of conversation going on between pilots and their ground controllers. It was, you know, you swing right or turn left here, or, you know, head straight ahead for so many clicks or something like that. So that was pretty cut and dried. Once we would land around, I guess it was 9 o'clock at night back in Okinawa. The other thing is since we had to come fly down around the Hainan Island, which was Chinese, we also sometimes carried Chinese operators with us because they were listening for Chinese communications. So, but once we got back, landed on Okinawa, that night, a group would pick up the tapes and all the other material that we had, written material and so forth, and bring that back to Torii Station. From there, they would take the information, the tapes. They had to take the big tape, and from there, they would spin that off into 7.5-inch reels, tape, reel to reel. And once we got it there, our guys on the ground, which was us, you know, if we were not flying, would listen to the information and transcribe it onto it was a multi-part paper as well as paper tape. We had to do a punch paper tape. And so that all had to be keyed in. So we had we had like 2 banks of workstations with tape recorders and continuous tape that we would, because a lot of times you'd have to listen to. The traffic in many cases wasn't clear. It was there was a lot of static. It was hard to understand at times because it would drop out, it would come back, there would be fuzz. So you'd have to have somebody on the ground to listen to it again to try and tease out the information, you know, put it in context with what was said before or afterwards to kind of come up with what probably would be or what it should be, what they were saying, okay? And then once you got a transcription, you know, that information was then sent back to NSA, where their analysts would look at it. And we also, well, actually before then, we had a translation department. They would take the transcripts and translate them into English, okay? A lot of those guys were guys that couldn't fly for one reason or another. Okay, they've been. I had my roommate, good friend of mine. He wasn't able to fly because inner ear problems or something like that, I think it was. So he became a full-time translator.
You didn't do any translating, you did the transcript and then...
Not while I was in Okinawa. I became a translator once I got over to Thailand. But while I was in Okinawa, I was strictly, I was airborne and then do the transcription stuff.
How long would it take between landing the information on the ground, sending it to the transcribers, and then getting it translated? Are we talking hours, days, weeks?
Hours. Hours, yeah. They wanted the information. That's why we had a 24/7 operation. There was a lot of traffic that came in, and they wanted to get it done as soon as we got it. And if it was really important, then it was transmitted right back to NSA in Fort Meade, and they would have their guys look at it. I remember after I finished it in Okinawa, we were sent, well, this was a time when we were wondering, well, you know, are they going to let us out early? Because we were supposed to be in for 4 years. And there was a lot of discussion at that point as to whether they were going to need us for 4 years. A bunch of us were let go a year early. We finished at Okinawa and they let us out. Unfortunately, that was not me. My very good friend, who I'm godfather to his son and he's godfather to mine, I met him in the service, and we met actually in El Paso, and he's from San Diego. He got out a year early. So he was one of the lucky ones. He went back to the States, got married and everything.
So what was a year early, 1972 or 73?
No, he got out in 1974. I got out in 75. So I was in 4 years.
How long were you in Okinawa?
A year and a half, 18 months, roughly.
What was the date you left? What year?
It was 74, because I got out of the service in June of 75. But anyway, any case, after I got out of, left Okinawa, I went back to the States, spent about a month there with my parents, and this was in Connecticut, and then went back to Thailand. This was Nakhon Phanom, or NKP Thailand, which was our northernmost base up in Thailand. It was on the Mekong River. It was a Royal Thai Air Force base. And the group I was with there was the 6908th Security Squadron. And basically we did the same operation there that we did in Okinawa, except that we were a ground operation insofar as our operators were on the ground, but our aircraft was flying over Laos and Cambodia. And it was a U-2 aircraft packed with radios. And the U-2 came out of, of course, that was a Strategic Air Command aircraft that flew out of Ubon, Thailand. And we would link up, we had a direct signal link with them. And our guys on the ground, we had an area that it was built up just like the inside of an RC-135, doing the same type of thing, listening for signals on the western side of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh Trail, and again, that was part of T-ball, trying to integrate all that information into so it's usable by the guys in the field, I guess.
Was that strictly on the ground the whole time, or did you do in-flight missions like before?
We were strictly ground there. It was a base, but In fact, that base had started off as a kind of a Air America base, and it was, when I'd done some reading about it, it was the base for the 56th Special Operations Squadron, which was guys that had gone into Cambodia and Laos, and fairly secret base, not much talked about. They did a lot of air search, air rescue type stuff, and air commando type stuff. And
how long did you stay at that base?
I was there a year.
A full year?
Yeah, I was there a year. I started off as an operator, and then doing the same type of stuff I was doing in Okinawa, but then I finally said, I'm getting bored with this, so I switched over and became the lead translator for our flight. So I went inside once they got, they give me the type material, and then I do the translation, and then from there that would be sent back to Fort Meade. I had another guy that's working with me, actually two guys, one who worked for me and then another guy who was a civilian. I believe he was either NSA or there was lots, nobody really knew. I mean, the guy never talked. He sat right next to me and he never talked. Never said a word. And it was interesting. It was interesting work.
How did the environment in Thailand differ from what you were used to in Okinawa?
Well, Okinawa was, at that time, Okinawa was strictly really a military environment, because there were so many bases on Okinawa, in camps, and you had Army, you had Marines, you had Navy, you had Air Force. I mean, just all over the island. And Kadena was a fairly large air base with lots of different aircraft there, from transports to passenger aircraft to reconnaissance aircraft. We had a squadron of SR-71, kind of like the stealth aircraft of the day at that point because of the speed and whatnot, and our own aircraft. And to Okinawa, I mean, Thailand was more laid back. We were a much smaller base. We were by ourselves up in northern part. There were several other bases in Thailand, but they were in much farther apart than Okinawa was, and we really didn't have much communications, if any, with any of them. Also on Okinawa, the local population, which were Okinawan Japanese, pretty much stayed to themselves and didn't really want to have a whole lot to do with the Americans, except they'd take your money, but that was pretty much it. Whereas in Thailand, I mean, a lot of the guys had girlfriends. I had a girlfriend over there. A lot of guys lived off base. I didn't. I decided not to. And it was a lot. It was hotter too. It was a tropical. Thailand's a tropical climate. Okinawa is sort of a semi-tropical environment. And it was just, I just enjoyed it more than I did Okinawa. Plus, I was getting closer to getting out, so that was a big plus.
experiences from Kadena or Thailand?
I think the thing that you come away with, or I came away with, well, one, my guys, and most of my guys that were in my group, none of us wanted to go in. We were pretty much, I don't know if we were anti-war, but we just kind of figured this was a big waste of time, especially at our stage of the game. And we were just waiting to get out. There were a lot of drugs. I'd say in Thailand, I was one of the very few that didn't smoke or do anything. I mean, I didn't touch anything, except a drink, but I didn't touch anything else. But most of the guys either smoked marijuana or hash or something else like that. Mostly because they were bored. I mean, they were just, you know, waiting to get out. And this was not just our group, but this was a lot of the guys from different outfits that were in that on that base. And it was so cheap. It was just, you know, it was almost as cheap as cigarettes were over there. There were, you know, we had every so often the military police, the Airforce police, they would come through and with dogs and do room searches and stuff like that. And once in a while, somebody got caught, you know, and they would get taken off of duty and then sent back to the States, you know. So I know in one case in Japan, Okinawa, one of our guys he was caught selling and he was busted and went to the Japanese jail for 6 months. Then he went sent back to the States. But you know, by and large, we were just waiting to get out. We were just, you know, we did our job, and I have to say I did the best job I could. But I wasn't in love with the place, and yeah, I think the other part of it was that most of us were college grads in my group. We had my good buddy. He was Jim Ogden. He graduated from San Diego State. He had a degree in mathematics. I graduated from University of Connecticut, degree in mathematics. So there is a fairly educated group of guys. I had actually applied for, when I was down in basic training, to get into the officer training, but I didn't have the eyesight. You had to have 20/20 vision, and all they were really looking for was, at that time, were pilots and navigators, mostly navigators then, air navigators. So that kind of cut me out. And I remember at that, even before I went in, I was contemplating going, you know, saying, okay, I'm going to Canada. I'm not sticking around for this baloney. I didn't, because my father and my parents were going to disown me if I did. So I said, okay, I won't do that. It's not a good idea. So, and the environment at that time was definitely, you know, I was in a college. It was definitely anti-war at that point.
Where were you when you got promoted to staff sergeant? Because you had to work your way up through the ranks somehow.
I was in Thailand. I had, the way we did, well, it was time in service. It was certification testing. We had to take tests every so often for language, as well as for, because you had to be able to use the language and apply it to your job, which was mostly military stuff. And so you had to be able to identify aircraft and units, North Vietnamese units, and so on and so forth. And so I tested out. I was probably, if I recall, I may have been one of the only ones I was the only one in my group that went for staff sergeant out of my class. The rest of them had either gotten out already or didn't care. And the other thing for me was, when I was on flight duty, you got, in addition to your regular pay, you got flight pay and combat pay, because we were flying in a combat zone. So that was a big chunk of change. And when I got to Thailand, I said, well, I don't want to really lose that much. So that's what kind of motivated me to go for the staff sergeant level. And so that way I had extra cash when I was over there. And I was squirreling most of the money away, because I figured I was going to get back to the States. I was going to go back to grad school. So, which I did. But
did you receive any medals or citations?
well, everybody that flew received, for every 25 missions, you received an air medal. That was, I think, a holdover from World War II and Korean War for guys that flew in combat zones. And so you had to fly 25 missions before you got the air medal. So I got 2 of those. I flew 52 missions.
Wow, that's a lot.
So, well, there were guys there, and of course they were in for a lot longer, that flew well over 200 missions. So.
All those missions were 18-hour ones?
Yeah. Well, not all. Some of them were, if you did TDY down to Da Nang or someplace like that, you were flying smaller aircraft like EC-47s or RC or EC-121s, which were prop-driven aircraft, and you didn't fly that long. Our aircraft did an aerial refueling halfway through the flight. We would go, we'd get down there 6 hours in, we'd have to go off station a little bit. We weren't that far off, so we could continue to do our job, collect traffic, but for an hour we were refueling.
On the ground?
No, we were connected to a airborne tanker. So we had this big KC-135 flying up above us, connecting, and we were like on their umbilical cord down below, taking a drink while we were doing our job at the same time. So it was that was probably about the worst part of the flight, because it was a roller coaster. I mean, we were in their wash, and we were just like this the whole time. It was a roller coaster for an hour.
Doug, go back to when you were in the transcription and on the ground operations, and you changed shifts and then had a day and a half off and then went to the next shift. What would a typical shift be like when you were on the ground? Did you just show up and sit at a desk for X number of hours? Yeah,
they would pick us up from our barracks in a bus and then drive us out to Tory Station. Grab a bite to eat and coffee or something like that, and then head to your one of the workstations there, and sit down, put your headsets, grab a tape or a bunch of tapes, and thread up your tapes onto the tape decks, and set up your continuous tape so you could listen to stuff over and over again, and put your headsets on and just sit there and listen and type what you heard or what you thought you heard, and you did that for 8 hours.
So you never had a car? You got everywhere on foot?
I walked everywhere. That was a lot of the guys when we were over in Texas. My friend Jim Ogden, Tim Fox. Jim was he had a VW, a Bug, and but he was very much into antique cars. His family was, and my other friend Tim Fox, he went and bought himself a Ford Torino, and so I was able to get around with those guys. And a lot of the other guys in my outfit also, my class had cars from, back in those it was the muscle cars that they mostly drove. So there was a lot of that. But I decided, I want to save my money because I didn't know, my parents had very little money. My father was enlisted during the military, and they paid for my way through college, but that was pretty much it. And I figured if I wanted to go to grad school afterwards, I better save my money. Not that the GI Bill didn't help out, but that's what I did. So I walked everywhere. A lot of walking.
What were your barracks like at Kadena?
The barracks were, they were two-story, kind of, concrete, nothing glamorous or anything like that. You could fix up your room which way you wanted to. We seldom had inspections. Every once in a while they'd come through, but you pretty much had advance notice. I kept my area fairly clean. Certain times of the year we'd have water rationing because we didn't have enough water on the island. So those were kind of grimy, because if you had to fly a mission, you came back from a mission, you didn't take a shower, except you had this cold. They'd have a big, a trash can of cold water in there. And Okinawa, it could get at times, certain times of the year, it could get pretty chilly. I mean, we never had, of course, snow or anything like that, but it got fairly chilly because it was so humid all the time. And when the temperatures dropped, you felt it a lot more than, say, you might even here in Connecticut. So. And the same way in Thailand, it wasn't quite so bad because of a more tropical environment, but there were times there too that it got fairly chilly at night.
In Thailand, did you have the same thing where you had barracks on base?
Well, yeah, we had on base, we had, it was wooden barracks. Everything was basically wood. We didn't have any windows. If you were in open bay barracks, they were like screens, and you slept under mosquito tents because we had lots of mosquitoes, and also other bugs besides, and snakes.
Did you always have enough supplies, food, other things you needed?
Yeah, that was never a problem. We always had plenty of food. It was military, but it wasn't bad. Nothing bad about it.
Did you feel any pressure or stress?
I didn't feel stressed. I felt I was always tired because of our schedule. I never got really much sleep. Because of where we were located, we also didn't have much in the way of reading material. We had a small library on Kadena in Okinawa, but we had just a couple of shelves of books in Thailand, so we didn't have a whole lot of material there. So if you got anything, it came from your parents. I had decided when I got to Thailand, since I had an interest, I picked up the Thai language as well. I learned Thai while I was over there, and so I could speak it, and to some degree, not professionally, because it's a different language. It's a different alphabet completely. And so I was taking lessons from a lady that came on the base, and then I got to know her. I'd go off base and visit her and take lessons at her family's house there. And so I got to be able to read and write the language fairly decently.
Did you do anything special for good luck?
Not that I can recall, no.
How did people entertain themselves?
Some of the guys, I know, some of the guys had played college basketball, so I mean, there was, if you were pretty decent at it, they had pickup games or they had league games. There was, of course, softball on Kadena, not so much in Thailand. Some guys, played tennis. I did some reading. I would buy paperbacks at the BX Base Exchange. A lot of drinking. Guys gotten some thrown into the brig or into the for drinking too much or what have you. And when we were in the States, I mean, we were in the States for a year and a half while we were training. So we went out, and when I was in El Paso, I would my friend and I. He came from San Diego, so he was engaged. So he and I would go to meet his girl or his fiance in Tucson. So we drive out to Tucson, and she'd meet us there. And El Paso, I liked El Paso. It was nice. It was dry. It was desert, and I enjoyed it there. And it was a nice city. It's not a big one, but it was a nice city. And
did you see any USO shows?
No, never saw one.
Never had any entertainers come over?
Not that I can remember. We might have had one or two, but at that stage I never saw any USO people up in our areas. There were other kinds of entertainment, but I won't go into that. There was a lot of that.
Did you travel in any other countries or see any other places while you were overseas?
The only thing when I was in Thailand, I didn't take any time off when I was in Okinawa. When I was in Thailand, I took a week or 10 days off. I went up to Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is, this was with my girlfriend. This was where the king had his winter palace. So it was a very pretty location, very pretty town, and had a good time there.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events? Not particularly. For us, it was like it was a daily grind. It was work day in and day out, doing the same type of stuff pretty much. So. What did you think of officers and your fellow airmen?
Well, I think you divided it up in between the guys that were getting out or who were only there because they were going to be drafted, and the guys that were there because they really wanted to be there. And so it was us and the lifers, basically. There was, I mean, some of the guys who were career were nice guys. Some were very intelligent, obviously. I had one guy when I was in Thailand. He was my commander, and he was Chinese linguist, and he could read and write Mandarin Chinese. He had translated some books from Chinese into English. So, I mean, you're dealing with some fairly bright individuals. In Thailand, we worked in an area, our we were kind of like a little subsection, but we weren't really connected with the main section. We were kind of like a support group. Well, the security service was providing support for everybody, but we worked in something called USAG, which stood for United States Support Activities Group. And this was a compound inside of some large blast revetments, because NKP had been carved out of the jungle, basically. So when Air America went in there, they wanted an operations base so they could get into Cambodia. And so this particular group, along with the 56th Special Operations Squadron, was the command and control center for a lot of what was going on in Vietnam. And I shouldn't say Vietnam, I should say the western part, that Cambodia, Laos, and anything that went on in the western part of South Vietnam. It wasn't a big base, but USAG had a lieutenant general stationed there, which was pretty high up. I was reading last night, I was there, I got out in June of '75. Just before I got out, you may have heard of the Mai Guez incident. I was there when that happened. We were, although we weren't and that was coordinated. Our efforts to extract those guys out of there was coordinated out of that group, by that general who screwed up royally. And so I was there listening and hearing the kind of stuff that was going on when it was happening. And it was really an interesting thing at that time. That was probably the most interesting incident. There was one other, but nothing really came of it. We went to, I forget what it was, a DEFCON situation, which is a defense condition level, where it was like the Soviets or the Chinese had gotten their backup, and we went into this mode where if anything were to happen, we were supposed to get on an aircraft, and our aircraft were supposed to go to some predetermined location. We didn't know where that was, nobody told us. It never happened, though. We were supposed to come down and to the operations center and get ready to fly if we had to, but nothing ever happened. But the Mai Guez happened. That was definitely a tense situation. We lost a bunch of guys out of our base. One was a chopper that went down with a whole bunch of special ops guys on board. Mechanical failure, lost 23 guys. And they lost a bunch of guys, a lot of aircraft, a lot of equipment during that incident. But I think, if there was anything to remember, that was pretty much it. That was the main incident that occurred.
Now, did you know that your service was coming to the end? Did they tell you ahead of time that they were going to let you out? Oh
yeah, I knew that. It was a 4-year stint. Of course, they tried to talk you into staying on. Well, they wanted me to stay on. I was a staff sergeant, and I hadn't caused them any trouble, so they said, yeah. They tried to talk me into it, and I said, no, don't even bother. I'm not interested. I already know what I'm going to do.
Do you recall your last day in service?
Yeah, I recall it very vividly. I was sicker than a dog. They had to extend me one extra day overseas because I had come down with food poisoning. One of the things about, I didn't live off base, but I did eat a lot of of the food from off base. And my girlfriend would get, you know, the food from the local market, which was right on the Mekong River. And it was an open air market, and there were flies everywhere and things like that. So I probably caught something right there. That's my best guess. But I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. I was dead. I mean.
So you stayed an extra day in Thailand?
I had to stay an extra day at the convenience of the government. And it says right on my DD 214 form.
What did you do in the days and weeks immediately after you left service?
Well, I got back to the States. I'd already been accepted into the grad program at UConn for economics because I'd applied while I was over there. And
so were you going to start that fall?
yeah, I started in September when I got back. So I got out in June. I found an apartment in Willimantic and moved in there, and so happens that I moved into my future wife, next door to my future wife. So didn't know that at the time, of course, but she was in grad school too at the time. So.
And did you use the GI Bill for grad school?
I did. Yeah, it certainly came in handy.
Did you stay in touch with any of your buddies from the service?
Well, I have like I said, I have my good friend out in San Diego, Jim Ogden. I've known him ever since we went in, and
you're still in touch?
we're
today?
still, like I said, we're best of friends.
Anybody else?
For a while, I had stayed in touch with Tim Fox, who was one of my roommates. I haven't really talked to him in many years, but hope to some point in the future again. I know where he is, I know where he lives, that kind of stuff, yeah.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
No, never did.
What did you do for a career after you graduated from grad school?
Well, when I got out, the economy was not in great shape. I was looking around for a job in economics. There goes your... Still rolling, but no light, huh?
We'll try to. We've only got a couple minutes.
Okay.
We're on battery.
Oh, okay. But yeah, want me to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I was looking around for any kind of position I could get in banking, because that was my specialty, and nothing to be had. So eventually, I actually worked, met my wife. When I graduated, we got married right after that, and that was in January of '77. I graduated in December of '76. And I worked for a very short time just packing boxes in a factory. And then from there I went and worked for a consumer finance company for a little while. And from there, and that was like just a few months, from there I went to work for a small bank in Woodbridge Bank and Trust Company, which my father-in-law was a member of the board of directors. And then after that, I went to work for NCR Corporation selling banking systems. And I worked for them for about 8 years. So I've been in some way connected with systems for about 30 odd years now.
And you're presently working at Central Connecticut State University?
Yeah, I started at Central in '99, and I've been working in the tech services or IT area ever since.
So did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Pardon me?
Did your military experience affect your thinking about war or the military in general?
Well, it didn't make me happy about it. Let's put it that way. I think there are a lot of things that were done that could have been done differently. In terms of, I think, you know, my personal opinion, and this is definitely my own opinion, is that we don't spend enough time trying to negotiate. We kind of jump to the gun, so to speak, too quickly, and when things could have been a lot different than the way they were. And I think that gets us in a lot of trouble. And saps, from an economic standpoint, it definitely saps our economy every time we do it.
How did your military service affect your life?
I think it changed sort of the way, the direction I was heading. I mean, my degree was in mathematics and economics at my undergraduate degree. So I probably would have focused more on the mathematics side of things. But once I got into the service, I never had a chance really to use that, which was and I didn't have access to any of the, you know, the journals or anything that I might have had access to back in the States. And so I was kind of bitter about that for a very long time. You know, to me, I almost look at it as saying that, you know, my 4 years in undergraduate were a waste because I lost all that time, and then 4 years in the military made it even worse. So I certainly wasn't happy about it. The other part of it was that I look at it from the standpoint of my father had already been in the military, so I'd already basically, although I hadn't been enlisted, I'd done a lot of time in the military already.
Well, Doug, I'd like to thank you for your interview, and I'd like to thank you for your service.
Oh, happy to be here and to give you whatever I could. And that was your shift.
You said something earlier
And
about paper punch tape or something?
yeah, you also had, you had to, of course, we had punch paper tape, which was
I don't think
like the,
people nowadays don't.
yeah, back then it was like yellow tape. It was paper tape. It was about an inch wide. And when you typed, this is like a teletype machine. Back, they probably don't know what that is either. The signal would be fed up to this punch machine, which would punch holes into that tape, and those holes, depending on the configuration, how many you had in a row and spaces between them, would represent the letters. Okay. The thing about the Vietnamese language, of course, is that they use what we call, French would say it's an accent aigu or an accent grave, which would be a circumflex up or a down mark above a letter, like or a vowel. But the Vietnamese had 6 different symbols that I would call them symbols you put over the different letters. Well, we had to convert that into, since our punch machines didn't recognize that, we had to convert that into a letter format. So you'd add an extra letter on the end of the word to indicate whatever sign or whatever symbol you were going to put onto that word, because the Vietnamese language, North Hanoi dialect was much different from the South Vietnamese or Saigon dialect. Much harsher language, harder tones, and if they would pronounce something, a TR for the South Vietnamese would be tr, the North Vietnamese would be cha. It sounded like a CH sound to us, okay? And so we had to convert, and then those, if it was like a, let's see, muy would be M-O-U circumflect I, okay? And you had to convert that into M-O-U-I. I forget what it was. The letter on the end would represent that symbol over that U, okay? And so we of course we had to learn that and then use that and create your punch paper tape as well as your hard copy. And that punch paper tape, of course, went along with the hard copy and the tape once you put it back into the jacket. Now, on the jacket of the tape, it was a paper jacket, and each piece of, or we call it a cut, was a segment of conversation or transmission that one of the speaker would. So we might collect a signal that went from, say, 0900 to 0930 hours, okay? We always used Zulu time, which was Greenwich Mean Time. No matter where we were flying, it was always measured in terms of Greenwich Mean Time. And so you would put on the jacket of that tape which cut it was, what time it was taken, what frequency you took that, you recorded that conversation, and how long it lasted, okay, and who the operator was that took who recorded it, and then that of course was transferred over onto your hard copy and onto your punch paper tape, so that was all put together. And from there, so like I said, we spent a full shift doing that. Now, as our part in the war kind of came to an end, except for us providing intelligence to the South Vietnamese, there wasn't as much traffic, So towards the end of my time in Okinawa, I would sometimes we'd come into the base. They wouldn't have much in the way of traffic. We'd turn right around and go back to the barracks. Nothing to do, so why stick around? And you'd just get your okay from from the flight commander, and that was it. You clock in and clock out.
Then I'm going to ask you some questions about daily life. How did you stay in touch with family when you were overseas?
I wrote a letter to my family every week. It was one of I don't know about the rest of the guys, but in fact, I just recently found those letters. My mother kept them all, so I have all those letters. I could tell them about my, what I did as off hours, but I couldn't say anything about what I did when I was working. I wasn't supposed to say anything. I wasn't supposed to tell anybody. The guys that were in my...
Your family didn't know what it was you were doing over there?
Didn't have a clue. Weren't supposed to tell them anything.
Were they actually censored, or they just trust you that you weren't going to...
I don't know. I mean, they might have been. I couldn't tell you. I know they told us that the guys that were married or had girls, you don't tell your wife, you don't tell anybody what you do. It's a secret. It's classified. Everything was classified. Everything that we worked with was classified. The planes we flew on were classified, top secret. And nobody got on those airplanes except us.
What was the food like?
Well, it was
a regular mess hall?
We actually had our mess hall was right across the street from us. So if we decided, most of the time we did eat on base, but a lot of the times my roommate, one of my roommates, when I was in Japan or Okinawa, his family, he actually spoke and read and wrote Japanese, because family were Japanese missionaries in Japan. His father had been a fighter pilot during World War II, and then after the war he became a missionary over there. And so that was Tim Fox, and so Tim spoke Japanese, and so we would go off base quite a lot, and go for dinner and things like that. I did a lot of walking. I never had a car when I was in the service. Getting late.